And so now we're our featured speaker. Um, our featured speaker today is David Drummond, who you may have heard of as the YQR Naturalist. Um, I had the opportunity to meet David on a field trip recently, and have to say I was extremely impressed by both his knowledge and his conservation commitment. I'll get back to that in a minute, but David is born and raised in Regina, so he's been fascinated by nature for his entire life. Had the good fortune to have grandparents that had a farm where there was forest, and his dad that took him fishing and so on. And so, of course, that opportunities to be in very nature. He said at a very early age, his Guido would teach him how to find bears and morels in the bush or how to catch perch with old fishing gear, and his Baba would teach him how to garden. And also something very important, how to pick the potato bugs off the plants. And he stayed interested in gardening. My son told us once that was why he never had an interest in gardening, as we made him pick potato beetles off when he was little. Anyway, David graduated, went to Luther College, then attended Lakeland College to study ecology and wildlife, from which he graduated in 2010. Since then, he's been growing his skills both in understanding nature and in foraging, spending a lot of time on land and in the kitchen, and managed a greenhouse at the food bank and a few kitchens on the way. So he has a deep interest in foraging from, and he's going to talk tonight about growing native plants in the garden from forager's perspective. So before I welcome David, I just want to say examples of David's knowledge follows in a field trip he was leading, and was very impressed by him pointing out names to all the lichens, which I thought were unknowable unless you took them into a lab. So very impressive, and have for years. Part of my spring tradition is to find a crayfish and blow gently in it, so all the flips run up the sides, just so that whatever, I like to see them. And I have wondered about the life cycle of these flips, but never found anything about it. I mentioned that to David out at Hidden, and he quickly told me, as I suspected, they are species specific, and they kind of gouge out on some of the things in it. Anyway, live in the corpus briefly and lay their eggs on it, and then it immediately hatch out, and the corpus comes after the beginning of next spring. So that's kind of irrelevant. It's just something I wondered about for like 4 years, and David seems to know everything, so I'm so pleased to learn that. And while we were hiking, he spotted some garbage somebody had left in Hidden Valley. Didn't have a bag to put it in, so when our field trip was done, David grabbed a bag and ran back up the hill to pick up the garbage, which is a demonstration of very significant conservation, dedication to conservation. So, man, very knowledgeable, very dedicated to conservation, and very interested in nature and the ability to forage for nature, and he's going to tell us about that now. So, David, welcome. Thank you very much. And
no, it does not. Share screen. Sharing. Done. Wonderful. Yep. I just gotta start the whole thing first. There we go. Okay. Okay. Good to go? Yes. Okay. As Dale was saying, born and raised in Regina, spent the majority of my life living here, went to school in Alberta for a little bit. The entire time I was out there, the only thing I ever really cared about was trying to reconnect with the land. I've always been told that it's not my place, or I don't know enough like that. So I always kind of wanted to fight that stereotype that settlers don't know nothing. So I spent a lot of time in schools, in various reservations, a lot of parks. And this is what I learned. So a lot of people come to me asking for help in their gardens, and I usually go towards things you can eat, because like I said, I want to reconnect with the land. And if you rely on the land for food, you have a deeper connection to it. And every calorie you take from the land is a calorie you're not taking from the system, FYI. That's a cow that doesn't need to be born. That's a chicken that doesn't need to be raised. That's a field that doesn't need to be plowed. So when you want to build an edible landscape on your own land, you got to start somewhere. Now, living in Regina, we have this issue with very large trees all over the place, especially if you live in the cold. So you need things that can deal with the shade. And if you live in the newer parts of town, you can need things that can deal with the sun. So we got a two-part solution to that. Saskatoons, or cherries, if you're into that. If you live in the inner parts of the city, and the outer parts of the city, buffalo berries. Cherries and Saskatoons are not shade tolerant, but shade willing, we'll call them. They have no problem growing in the under the canopy of other large trees, especially if those things are well established. And if you live on the drier parts of town, you want things like buffalo berry. So what these do is they're the first things to bloom. Buffalo berry, they're still blooming right now, and just, I think within the next week or two, tunes. So that means all of our lovely native bees have something to eat, other lovely native pollinators, flies, butterflies, moths, whatever. They have a late fruiting date as well. So unlike a lot of our cultivars and things, which come into season as quick as possible, these things can hang around well into the next migration season, which is great if you have a lot of migratory birds coming through your yard. Personally, I don't feed birds with bird feeders. I just grow food for them. It's usually my way of going about it. Adding birds, people like it. It's a good way to get photos, things like that. I find it's problematic insofar as it selects artificially other birds over others based on their aggression or how many flocks they gather and things like that. And so instead, I like to grow plants. And if I have plants spread out all over my yard, the birds kind of partition themselves based on strata, based on food type, based on exposure. It's really nice to see, actually. So here we got some lovely buffalo berry blooms. Buffalo berry is a dioecious plant. So this is the female, this is the male. And then Saskatoons are meaning they're perfect. So they got a little stigma and a little stamen right there in the middle. So if you want to plant buffalo berries, you got to find a boy and a girl. If you want to plant Saskatoons, just get as many as you can, because you can never go wrong with Saskatoons. So when you start adding new varieties to your garden and you start adding more variety to your garden, you also change the structure of your leaf litter, which a lot of people don't think about. But when you live downtown, a lot of what we have dominating the area is elms and ash and maple. And you get this kind of monoculture in the leaf litter. And a lot of people don't think about that. If you have just the same kind of leaves, you're going to have the same kind of decomposers, the same kind of animals that attack that. If you have a variety in leaf litter, you have a variety in compounds in the leaves, you have a variety of things rotting at different rates, different textures of stems, different textures of leaves. all of that builds up towards a nice big happy leaf litter. And leaf litter is where your pollinators hide. It's where your butterflies like to overwinter. It's where all our little indigenous frogs hide out a lot of the time too. Wood frogs, not chorus frogs. So we want indigenous because it has variety, but it also has nutritional. A lot of our cultivars are designed to either look a certain way or to taste a certain way. And in doing that, you lose a lot of the very subtle, we'll call it phytochemicals, things that comprise the diet of the birds and all the insects that are really actually quite beneficial to their overall health and immunity, things we don't really think about. So I don't like rototillers. Instead, I like to grow things. Whoops. Why is it doing that? I clicked something. That's okay. So instead of rototilling, I like to grow short-lived perennials that grow tap roots that do the work for me. What did I do? I don't know what I did. Yeah, it does. Yeah, just there you are. That's okay. So anyway, I don't like using rototillers. I read a very nice treatise on no-till agriculture that really spoke to me. And ever since then, I've kind of ditched all the fancy implements. So when I say short-lived perennials, we have two lovely things. We got the yellow rose, Oniathera biennis. Biennis literally means biennial, and it flowers in its second year. You can actually keep it around for multiple years. But what I find is it grows so fast, so vigorous, it creates a. Oh, that's okay. So, especially if you have really thick, rocky clay soil, things like Oniathera grow really fast, really deep tap roots, and it creates a nice deep hole when you pull it out that you can drop other things in without having to do any kind of digging whatsoever. Same thing with fireweed, nice drifts and patches if you leave it alone, and that's a really good way to temper the soil, especially if you got that thick clay when you're living in the south end. They're also completely edible. With that in mind, Oniathera biennis is edible. I find it's more edible when you boil it a few times or treat it, pickle it, preserve it, something like that. It's a stronger taste. But fireweed, on the other hand, you can eat any part of it pretty much at any stage. It gets a little stringy when it gets older, but when it's young, you can eat it pretty much like an asparagus. The leaves are edible, the flowers are edible. You can make medicinal teas out of it. And it's really popular with pollinators, especially moths and butterflies. And if you're having issues with attracting things, the yellow evening primrose is a guaranteed way to get some really pretty moths in your yard. Very easy to source seed, very easy to grow. If you're growing them, I suggest growing the yellow evening primrose from seed. It just grows better in my opinion. And starting seed for the fireweed. They have such tiny little seeds, growing them a bit of a crapshoot. So as you build your garden, as you build your little forest, you want to fill in those spaces. And naturally in the wild, as the aspens and the Saskatoons start, growing up, taking more space, create these nice little shaded areas, and that buildup of leaf litter changes the soil structure over time. And you can fill it in with nice understory plants. So commercial like to grow in the bright sun, but our native raspberries actually grow very well in dappled light. So we have trailing raspberry, we have dwarf raspberry, we have just the rubicidius, standard raspberry. They all grow very well in the dappled light of your backyard with all your new berry bushes growing in. If you have a more sandy kind of yard or a more yard, I suggest bearberry. It makes a great ground cover. It attracts a lot of indigenous pollinators, especially in the springtime with those little pink flowers. You can see them right there. And then also, you got currants and gooseberries. Currants don't have thorns, gooseberries do. A very early flowering species as well. Very important to your native pollinators, especially those little sweat bees and minor bees. And of course, these ones are not as late in the season. Raspberries can run from like July to August, but you'll start seeing gooseberries as early as June. And the bearberry, they have the berries can actually persist for quite a while, actually. So you can be picking berry well into the first snowfall if you really want. It's also an evergreen too, so it's the first thing you'll see when all the snow goes away. It's quite resistant actually to forest fires too, with the thick woody stems. It's a very interesting plant, and I just love having it in the yard. They use it quite effectively as a ground cover around the university, actually, at the disease control lab, if you ever want to go see it in landscaping. They also use some, which one? It's star-flowered false Solomon seal. They plant that all around the north side of the building as well. They've really gone gung-ho plants there, and I really like it. So, a lot. I don't know why I did that. So, a lot of our indigenous perennials have a lot of very unique properties. I love the mint family because a lot of our indigenous perennial mints are edible. And they run the gamut in flavor from very sweet to very pungent, from very aromatic to kind of dull but very subtle earthy tones. I especially love these three. These three are my favorite when you want to attract pollinators. They're really great if you have a shady yard, if you have a wet yard, if you have a dry yard, they find a way. Agastache especially is really good for inhabiting those kind of liminal spaces between, say, fences and trees, or the parts of your garden where other things don't want to grow, but the weeds just really want to grow. It grows very tall. Within a short time, within about 5 years, you can actually have a nice little collar chest high. They're extremely popular with the bees. You will see a lot of variety of bees around your agastache. Mint is mint, it's delicious. It's great if you have any kind of permanent boggy spots in the yard. It likes to grow in those liminal areas around where it's shady and wet, around the edges of the house. And especially if you have ponds or areas where you have a bit of runoff that likes to gather, it's really good there. Comes back year after year. Bergamot tastes actually just like oregano. Yeah, the leaves are nice and spicy. Some people make a medicinal tea to gargle with their throat, but I find it's doing it again. I find it really good as an oregano substitute. I actually use it to make my wild zatar spice, and those lovely little tubular flowers are one of the few things that I can very regularly see hummingbird moths at. So they're all perennial too. So unlike a lot of the other culinary herbs you have to buy every single year or take a lot of good care of or hide away in the greenhouse, these things are hard. They are adapted from here. They are from here. You're going to keep getting them. After a while, even say something like mint, it may even become a bit of a problem. So eat a lot of it. But it's really, really, really good to have in the yard. It's also actually a kind of barrier against grazing. A lot of deer and hare, they don't actually like to eat the buds off of those. They're a little bit too pungent. So it's nice things to have around your vegetable garden as a kind of a barrier. Now, if you have a really dry yard, you can try a skunk bush instead. That's a member of the sumac family. It has the lovely, cute little trilobate leaves here with the little 3 lobes and 3 leaflets, reddish berries. And what I do is I collect them between September and October when they start to dry out naturally in the sun. Give them a nice little tap on the bush, they fall off. And I collect them, sort them, and I grind them with a poppy mill, and then I mix it with the dried leaves from the bergamot here, with its fuzzy little leaves. And I make kind of a Middle Eastern spice mix with that. It's actually really good. Dash leaf here. Agastache leaf has a long history in indigenous culinary traditions. When tea and coffee and other baked goods started to be introduced to the plains and things like that, sugar was very expensive. So like handing out sugar to put in your coffee was a bit less common as it was today. But indigenous people did not like the taste of coffee. Mix in powdered agastache leaf to improve the flavor. That was an interesting thing I learned when I was at the agastache. Pretty much the whole plant: stem, leaf, flower, root. Strongest concentration is in the buds and in the young leaves. Especially unopened buds, they're really strong in flavor. It's a very sweet licorice anise flavor. It's very good. You got to try it. But what I do with mature leaves actually is I'll wrap little parcels of perch in the leaf and steam it with a little bit of salt on top. It's quite good actually. So there are actually all kinds of interesting species you can grow. And the more you experiment, the more you learn and the more you value these things. I didn't understand what people meant on certain forums until I was actually out there trying. So this lovely little fella here, actually, if you go out into the garden, it's starting to pop up right now. That is strawberry blight, Chenopodium capitata. And if and what I did is I have a few little hidey holes around Regina where I know the groundskeeper and he doesn't spray anything. So I go out and I go picking. So usually the first 2-3 weeks of May is prime leaf time for these guys. It looks just like spinach, same family. It's actually very closely related to beets. And I mixed it in with a little bit of pesto with my pasta. How was it, Maddie? It was, but yeah, very high in vitamin B, vitamin A, vitamin C. You let it go to seed, it grows these cute little accessory fruits. So the fruit is actually the black part in the middle. It's a little sheen. And then the red part is a expanded endocarp that helps, make it more appealing to animals. So birds or something comes along and spreads the little seeds away. But it's kind of like a bland tasting strawberry, but the whole plant is edible, bud to bloom. And you can even eat the roots, actually. They taste like kind of like a watered down beet. And even if it gets old, if you let a clump just get bigger and bigger and bigger, it'll still taste good. It's one of the few things. So like people always talk about how edible dandelions are, but if you find a dandelion clump that's older than 2 years old, it tastes a bit like a shoe. And it's weird for a wild plant. It tastes great. No matter how old it is, no matter how young it is, it's just yummy. It's really easy to grow from seed. You can actually find seed from major producers, from local producers. And if you just go for a walk and you find a little accessory fruit, you just pick it yourself. No one's going to stop you. Another thing that produces berries people don't normally think of, all of our native cactuses produce edible berries. And I said cactuses, not cacti. Cacti refer to multiples within the same species. Cactuses is multiples of multiple species. Same goes with fish and fishes. I learned you something. Really easy to grow on your property, especially if you got lots of south-facing exposures. Prickly pears. Downside, they have thorns on the fruit as well. Upside, a little bit of boiling, all that stuff falls off. Double upside, you can actually eat the whole plant. The pads, the berries, the flowers, the whole thing's edible. If you find a way around those spines. In Spanish, they call it nopal. We also have another species, which is actually this guy right here. If you use INAT, it's called the spiny star. If you use a local resource, it's called a pincushion cactus. And it grows it looks kind of like a grape. It tastes very much like a grape, and it doesn't have any thorns. They don't grow a lot of them, so it's more like a nice little trail nibble. But if you do manage to get a hold of some, they're really great to have on your property as well. Very, very, very pretty, very tasty. And then native legumes. This guy is a breadroot. You can easily source seed from a friend's property or from providers. It takes a bit of time for it to grow a root, but actually this guy is also known as a prairie turnip, and it grows a very thick perennial underground. And after give a few years and stuff, you can dig that tuber up and you can peel the skin off in one go, and you can even eat it raw. Its taste is actually not that dissimilar from a nutty. Does anyone know what a jicama is? Yes, it's very similar to a jicama. It's like watery, kind of nutty. It's really good. It's really good. You can dry it out and turn it into a flour. You can bake it, you can boil it, you can fry it, you can eat it raw and put it in a salad. It's a really versatile vegetable. It was one of the primary food sources for a lot of indigenous people of the plains, especially as you move towards the mountains. Actually, they even feature a breadroot in the Disney Plus movie Prey, the predator pre. It's one of the first scenes with indigenous people harvesting vegetables in the valley of digging breadroots. They actually got that factually correct. They even used the right species. And then this beautiful little guy, great for attracting pollinators, especially great if you have a lot of wet areas on your property. Creates a nice story about hip high. This is wild licorice. And yes, just like that licorice, the commercial variety, Glycyrrhiza glabra. This is Glycyrrhiza lepidota. So that's our native variety, but you can still use the roots to isolate the flavor and make your own licorice extract. Mix it with a little bit of wild sarsaparilla, which is also native to our bushes, and all the ingredients to make your own wild root beer. Yeah, cool stuff, actually. There's no sassafras native to Saskatchewan, so you might have to go searching elsewhere for that. And yeah. Does anybody have any questions?